as promised, going to do more extended thoughts on the Bellew Cleverly fight now I've had a bit of time to digest it, think about the result, etc. I think the first thing that's quite interesting is, and perhaps I'm going to take a different stand to this to a lot of people who have YouTube channels and have discussed the fight, but I think we are safe to assume that Tony Bellew won the last 4 rounds of the fight. As far as I could make out, Nathan Cleverly was landing little, maybe even nothing in the last 4 rounds of the fight, and it was all Tony Bellew in those last 4 rounds. Now, the scoring of this fight is slightly bizarre, so it's possible I've got that wrong, but I think we're relatively safe to assume that Tony Bellew whitewashes Cleverly in the last 4 rounds. Now, if we take that as fact, then at least in terms of the official judging of the fight, Nathan Cleverly's tactics worked. He may not have had the stamina, the fitness, the capability to go for 12 rounds with a bigger man, and on the night Bellew was a substantially bigger man, but tactically, from the off, perhaps Cleverly didn't have the worst idea. The reason I say this is because if we take it as read that Cleverly lost the last 4 rounds, and then if we take it as read, which we have to, that one of the judges scored the fight in Cleverly's favour, then Cleverly must have won, of the first 8 rounds, he must have won at least 6 and split 1 with Tony Bellew. So Cleverly won at least 6.5 or 7 rounds of the first 8 on one judge's card, on the basis that surely he lost the last 4. Now, I wasn't scoring those rounds as convincingly to Cleverly. I had him up, but probably 5-3 up after 8. I certainly didn't have him 6-2 up, 7-1 up. I was 5-3. I could have seen it being 4-4. But clearly, Cleverly's tactic of throwing the jab and moving scored well with the judges. Clearly, the fact that he wasn't landing power punches, clearly the fact that he wasn't, coming for a war, wasn't affecting the judges' scoring, because even the widest decision was 116-112. In other rounds, 8 rounds to 4. So I think it's safe to assume that after 8 rounds, even that judge had it 4-all, with the other 2 most likely having Cleverly ahead after 8. Now, with that being the basis, and I think we do have to accept Bellew won the last 4, and we do have to accept this was judged as a very, very close fight, it is logical to assume that after the 8 rounds, Nathan Cleverly was winning this fight on the judges' cards. Now, he ran out of gas. His legs looked like he'd gone. He spent the last 4 rounds against the ropes, taking a beating. Tony Bellew whitewashed him those 4 rounds, and Tony Bellew deserved to win the fight. I scored the fight to Tony Bellew. However, I think tactically, perhaps, and whilst Cleverly did show a lot of flaws to his game last night, tactically, maybe he didn't fight the worst fight, because I think if he'd been able to continue his performance in the first 8 rounds into the last 4, he would have won this fight. He may not have deserved to win the fight. Tony Bellew probably did do more, and probably it certainly was a deserved winner. But I think with the judging as it was, Nathan Cleverly may well have won this fight if he hadn't faded stamina-wise, because clearly he was scoring effectively with the judges. In round 1, which I definitely scored to Cleverly, his jab was effective, it was accurate. It wasn't a Larry Holmes style jab, it wasn't a hurtful, dangerous punch, it wasn't overly snappy, but it was landing, it was accurate. Bellew was getting caught with it. It was consistent. Cleverly also, obviously learning from the Sergei Kovalev defeat, didn't plant roots You know, he was in against a bigger man tonight. He didn't make the same mistake he'd made against Kovalev and just stand there and trade. He tried to use his athleticism and his capability. So it was a case of activity with the jab and get out of there. Activity with the jab and get out of there. It wasn't attractive. It wasn't what we were expecting to see after all the build-up. It won't have gone down well with the casual fans who bought the pay-per-view. But it certainly was effective with the judges. Now, having said that, even had Cleverly gone on to win this fight by fighting rounds 9, 10, 11 and 12 in the manner with which he started, I would still, and this is coming as an ardent Cleverly fan, I would still not have been impressed. And I would have still suggested that this fight showed huge flaws in Cleverly's game as a cruiserweight last night. It wasn't there for me, because in the first 8 rounds, even if we forget about the terrible rounds 9 to 12, in the first 8 rounds, Cleverly gave us, you know, pretty substantial cause for concern. For a start, we know Cleverly isn't a heavy-handed fighter at the bigger weights. You know, I think we can accept that. But he really was feather-fisted last night. Like, nothing he was throwing even seemed to discourage Bellew. You know, it really was quite apparent, the difference in power. And I don't consider Bellew to be a massive puncher. Obviously, we know that Cleverly threw a bare minimum amount of right hands in this fight. Now, there's some discussion on an IFL TV interview post-fight. He said that he hurt his right hand throwing a punch and hitting Bellew's forehead. I imagine more will come out about that in due course. I think there's also some scope in the argument that after the Kovalev defeat, and seeing that he was in against a bigger man, he wanted to fight the fight like a game of chess, you know, using distance, using a jab, rather than get stuck in with power punching. Maybe he didn't want to throw that right hand because he didn't want to expose himself to getting counterpunched by the bigger, heavier-handed Tony Bellew. What I will say is that at the elite levels of cruiserweight, somebody with as little power as Cleverly showed, and somebody who was as one-dimensional, you know, only using one hand, only using sort of in and out movement, it's not going to be enough. You know, some of the cruiserweights out there, like Tony Bellew was able to, will be able to walk through his jab. And if he's got nothing with the backhand to discourage them, and he's too scared to throw it because he doesn't want to get hit back, because he realises he's smaller at the weight, then he doesn't have a future at cruiserweight. Now, I know it may be a difficult one, because I know he's big for light heavyweight and small for cruiserweight, but, I mean, let's face the facts. If you're too scared of getting hit to throw your right hand, and your left hand is too weak to cause any damage to a cruiserweight, then you're not looking like you've got an elite level or a European level future at the weight. But Cleverly, I think one-dimensional is a good way of describing his performance. Whilst it may have been effective in the eyes of the judges, I didn't see him go to the body. I didn't see him with any inside game. I'd have liked to have seen him mix it up a bit more on the inside. You know, he didn't plant roots like he did with Kovalev, but even his movement was one-dimensional. It was just sort of backing off. I mean, Richard Dwyer did a video last night which was very good, which highlighted Cleverly's inability to clinch and to tie Bellew up on the inside. How useful would that have been in the fight? I mean, seemingly last night he didn't have many facets to his game, you know, other than the sort of one-dimensional jab, one-dimensional movement. You know, a complete fighter will have enough power to warn their opponent off. They'll have an inside game where they're able to, you know, fight on the inside, they're able to clinch, they're able to tie an opponent up. They've got body, you know, they can work the opponent's body. They can throw punches off the jab, you know, work the hook to the body, work the uppercut. Cleverly didn't have that. He was one-dimensional. And then, I think, as he came late into the fight, you know, having a bigger man up against him, it drew the energy out of him, it sapped his strength, it fatigued him, and he didn't have a lot left. I think it was a combination of that and sort of scared of the power of Bellew, you know, after the Kovalev experience. You know, he didn't want to get knocked out again. So, all in all, a very disappointing performance from Cleverley. Even though, as I say, his tactics may have been effective with the judges and their scoring, even if he'd won the fight, you wouldn't think after this that the guy has scope to be an elite level cruiserweight. There just wasn't facets to his game, and there wasn't enough to cause problems and damage to the Marco Hooks of this world. I mean, you need to bring more than an A plan. You need to have an outside and inside game. You need to work the head. You need to work the body. You need to have a jab. You need to have a backhand. Like, he was a long way away from a complete fighter, Nathan Cleverley, last night, and I was disappointed. I don't see him having a future at cruiserweight, which begs huge concerns for his future, because it's unclear whether he'll be able to make light heavyweight now after forcing on all that extra weight. So as I say, Tony Bellew definitely deserved to win the fight. For me, he pressed the action more. He landed the more dangerous looking shots. His output, he outworked Nathan Cleverley, which very few would have guessed, including myself. And Tony Bellew was a very deserved winner. As I say, I scored the fight 7 rounds to 5 in Bellew's favour, but it was a convincing 7 rounds to 5. It wasn't a 7 rounds to 5, ooh, I could see that going either way. It was 7 rounds to 5, Bellew's definitely got this. And I think the reason being that some of the rounds I scored to Cleverley were kind of, could have gone either way. Dubious rounds. Whereas the Bellew rounds, especially the last 4, they were just total domination from Bellew. So he definitely deserved to win the fight. And he showed a level of capability. However, I must say, my concerns still exist about Tony Bellew. In fact, I'd go as far as to say Tony Bellew did exactly what I expected him to do in this fight. Maybe his work rate was slightly better, but Tony Bellew put in the performance I expected him to. I don't think Tony Bellew overperformed. It's just Nathan Cleverley so badly underperformed, with his tactics. So I think that's the best way of putting it. I don't think it was a great performance from Bellew. I think it was an awful performance for Cleverley, which allowed the win for Bellew. But let's just briefly talk over some of the concerns I have with Tony Bellew. Clearly, he had more left in the tank than Nathan Cleverley. Clearly, he did. I think that was probably something to do with being a larger man. His weight making a toll and sapping the strength of Cleverley. But Tony Bellew, for me, I'm still not convinced by his stamina, believe it or not. There was a point in round 9 or 10, I actually thought there is scope that Cleverley may win by stoppage here. As Tony Bellew, even though he's dominating, looks so gassed, it may not take a lot to get the job done. Nathan Cleverley couldn't find anything, but Tony Bellew, for me, didn't, there were times in the fight he looked like he was breathing heavily, as did Nathan Cleverley, don't get me wrong, but we're talking here about Bellew going on to fight for a world title, and I don't think he's got elite level stamina over 12 rounds. I think what was very noticeable was his lack of accuracy. I think in the first half of the fight, his punch success ratio was 7%. Now, Cleverley was showing adequate movement, he was showing pretty decent head movement, but Tony Bellew really was very, very inaccurate, often ridiculously. There was points where he was missing Cleverley wildly, and had Cleverley been more on his game, or had he been in against a better cruiserweight, perhaps they'd have been able to take advantage and counterpunch him, because Bellew was swinging wildly and missing at points. When he got Cleverley on the ropes and Cleverley was doing his head movement, what I'd have liked to have seen was him to take a step back, time it, and then hit Cleverley. But instead he fought in a phone box, he fought very close up, he was swinging, and he was allowing Cleverley's head movement again and again to make him miss. I really thought after round 9 there was no way Nathan Cleverley was going to make the final bell. I know, in my opinion, Cleverley does have a decent chin, but I thought Bellew would have been able to get him out of there. And I think the reason Bellew didn't get the stoppage is threefold. Number one, I think Cleverley's got a good chin, and I don't see Bellew as an elite level puncher at cruiserweight. Number two, he was too inaccurate. He didn't give himself enough clean shots on Cleverley. It was messy. It was clumsy. It wasn't clean. So I think he wasn't clean enough because he was too inaccurate. The shots he were landing weren't overly hurtful, and also his stamina. The output was good in the 9, 10, 11, but if he could have just turned it up to the next level and threw more educated, more accurate, more meaningful punches. I mean, Cleverley looked like a gust of wind was going to blow him over, and I think it was a big, big concern Tony Bellew didn't get the job done. I mean, either stamina, accuracy, or power. Like, there was something missing that meant that he couldn't, have KO'd Cleverley. I don't think Cleverley would have got through rounds 10, 11 and 12 against one of the cruiserweight champions. I really don't. Also, Bellew, I'm not going to pretend Cleverley, was landing hurtful punches and giving him a beating at all. But Bellew was very, very susceptible in the early parts of the fight to getting hit by Cleverley's jab. And he'd have to show more advanced tactics with regard to avoiding that if it was more of a spiteful jab from a different cruiserweight. I think all in all, if Tony Bellew fights at the elite level of the cruiserweight division, goes for a world title shot, concerns still exist about him. My concerns about his chin still exist, even though that wasn't tested in this fight. But I think he's quite hittable. I don't think he's a high stamina fighter. And I just think the lack of accuracy is apparent. I really do. So, all in all, I'd say a disappointing performance from both guys. Realistically, you've got guys out there like Ola Afolabi, over Mackenzie. Potentially these two aren't even the best cruiserweights in Britain after that performance. It was there were flaws with both of them. I was particularly disappointed by Cleverley because I thought whilst Bellew showed flaws, I expected him to do that. I expected Bellew to put in a British European level performance, and he deserved to win, but that's what he did in my book. Whereas Cleverley hugely underperformed and didn't hit the heights that I expected to in my estimations. Now, as I said at the start of the video, and I do think this is key, I don't think tactically Cleverley was too far off. I think Cleverley got it right not to plant roots and stand in front of Bellew like he did with Kovalev. I thought he was right to try and use movement and athleticism and a jab rather than going into war with a bigger, more powerful man. And it was effective with the judges. Let us not forget that had Cleverley's stamina not gone in the last quarter or third of the fight, the judges had him on target to win. So I don't think his tactics were necessarily too far wrong. But even if he had gone on to win the fight, there are too many gaping holes in Cleverley's game. Too one-dimensional, no inside game, no power. The list goes on. And I think realistically, it's going to be very, very tough for him to continue at cruiserweight. I doubt whether he's going to be able to make light heavyweight. I see it as a very, very long road back for Nathan Cleverley. Tony Bellew, I'm sure there's big fights out there for him at cruiserweight. If I'm honest, I can't see him winning a world title at this stage. Thanks for watching. Do let me know your thoughts on the fight.